This is Jennifer Pepito with the Restoration Home Podcast. This is the show where we talk about life-giving habits for flourishing family culture. I'm so excited to talk on the show today about teaching our children to work. It's an idea that comes up a lot, and I know that there is some disagreement out there, like should children work or should they only play? What is childhood about? And at the Peaceful Press and in the Restoration Home community, we believe that we are raising adults. So we're raising people who will one day have their own homes and their own spaces. And we're really excited about the opportunity to teach our children how to work in child-appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and child-friendly ways. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about 5 ways that Mom Moody taught her children to work today on this podcast, as well as some resources and ideas for inspiring your children to work, some of the things that we've done. In the Restoration Home community, every month we have new habits that we work on together to nurture a flourishing family culture. And so in March, we were working on teaching our kids room care. We've worked on teaching and following through with chore charts. And so one of the books then we read as a Restoration Home community was Little Man of the Family by Ralph Moody. And so it's part of the Little Britches stories. If you were doing the Playful Pioneers for the second time, you might have read it. It's a beautiful book about how after Ralph Moody's father died, his mom had to figure out how they could stay together and how they could pay the rent. You know, they were in a really struggling time. They'd lost their dad. Unbeknownst to the children, the mother was actually pregnant. And so the whole book chronicles the ideas that they had for providing for their family. And it was not a modern book. Like it was written quite a few years ago, and we wouldn't expect our children to work today the way that the Moody children worked. So I'm not saying this is how you should do it in your family, but I want to highlight some of the ways that Mom Moody taught a work ethic, because the thing about a good work ethic is your children are going to be able to be independent adults. I have, 7 children, 6 have graduated from my homeschool, and they all support themselves. They all are ready workers and hard workers, and they're able to advance in their jobs or in their careers because they aren't afraid of work. And that was something that was nurtured in childhood through our family homestead, our family mission that we went on for a few years to Mexico. So we have all these family experiences that really nurtured a work ethic in our children. And Mom Moody did that as well. So I'm going to talk about these 5 ways. The first one was that she modeled hard work. Mom Moody, in the book, she always outworked her children, and she took responsibility for the work that needed to be done. So if you want your children to be hard workers, you can't be just telling them what to do. You need to be working with them. You need to be, if you ask your kids to take the trash down to the curb, walk out there with them and make it a community event. Make as much as you can. If you're asking them to fold the clothes with them. If you're asking them to do the dishes, do it with them, because children are going to be so much more willing to work if it's a community effort instead of you, sitting on the couch scrolling Instagram and telling them what to do, right? And, I think that the podcast episode that kind of reflects back to this is when we interviewed Justine Ock on Sacred Homes. She talked about how important it is in a sacred home for our children to see mom and dad working if they're going to appreciate work. This might mean, if you have a husband who works long hours at a job outside the home, maybe it's going to be that on the weekends he spends a little bit of time taking care of the pets with the kids or taking care of the plants, working in the garden. Just having some work modeled for our children is going to help them respect and value a work ethic. The second one that Mom Moody did to teach a work ethic was she was thankful for the help. She wasn't constantly setting a higher standard or belittling her children for their mistakes. In one chapter, she sends them out with this full wagon. She's cooking food to make money and delivering it to the neighbors. And they're paying for these, special loaves of bread and pies and things. And in this one chapter, the kids are taking this super heavy load and the cart spills and they lose the whole load. And it was a really devastating loss. Like, they didn't have a lot of money. They didn't necessarily have a lot of food either. And so to lose a whole wagon full of food and just have it go dripping off down the gutters was devastating. But Ma, even when they made a big mistake like that, was very patient and kind. She didn't get mad at them. She just understood that there are mistakes are made. And so if your children are doing jobs for you, do your best to appreciate what they did. Like a little child, one day my granddaughter was here and she spilled some dirt out of a plant. And so we have this little tiny vacuum. It's like a little cordless vacuum. And I started vacuuming. She wanted to help. So I gave her the vacuum. She didn't do a perfect job, but I didn't criticize her about it. I just later on, when she wasn't looking, I went back and finished it myself. When people are doing the best to their ability to help, appreciate that help. Don't constantly treat them like they're a bother, because little ones really want to help. Like a 3-year-old actually really wants to get in there and do dishes with you. So maybe the job for them is rinsing the dishes. Maybe the job for them is putting them away. Give them the jobs that they can handle and then really appreciate them. Express gratitude for what they do. Hey, this applies to husbands too. Sometimes we want our husbands to help and then we criticize everything they do. But maybe it'd be a good idea to also express a little bit more gratitude for their contributions if we want that help around the house that we need. The third way that Ma Moody taught a work ethic was that she rewarded hard work. They were very poor, like living really hand to mouth, struggling so hard to stay in their house. But Ma offered incentives within her means. So they took a job, the kids took a job picking cherries, and they would get, paid in boxes of cherries or something. And so Ma presented this idea that, if you can pick the cherries, then I'll be able to can some of that fruit. And in the winter, we'll have cherry pies. And so even though that reward was far off, it probably wouldn't motivate a modern child to think that someday in the winter we'll cook them a cherry pie. But Ma was able to offer some encouragement. When the fair rolled around, Ma was able to take a little bit of money out of the cookie jar, wherever she stored it, and give her children some spending money. And so thinking about ways that you can reward, if your kids all helped you clean the garage, take them out to ice cream. If you have, added some chores to their chore chart, and the Peaceful Press has an awesome chore chart with all these different activities you can put on the chart and checklists. So lots of different resources in that chore pack to help you incentivize chores. But then when something's been done, find a way to reward your kids, especially as they're developing that habit. We have to take the time to develop habits. And as we're learning those habits, it's awesome if you can offer some incentives along the way. And then the fourth step is that Ma Moody protected her children. So they were in a very intense situation. And, Ralph did some crazy things to help provide for the family, like he was getting railroad ties that had been spilled off the railroad, and he was carrying them back to sell as fuel to people. So they were heavy, and at one point he was crossing the railroad to get them, and so it was kind of dangerous. I don't think his mom knew about that one, but within her means, within her ability, she really protected her children's needs for rest and education. Ralph was trying to offer to drop out of school and work full time, but she's like, no, you need to be able to get a job because, part of the reason that your Pa, or get an education, you need to get an education because if Pa had had a little bit more education, he might not have gotten sick and died. And so she did her best within her constraints to protect childhood. And I know this can be a tough balance when you're doing some homesteading. Like we had situations in our family life. We were missionaries. We were building a house to live in. We had a small sort of farm where we had like weeds for days. And so in those kinds of situations, it can be easy to maybe put a little bit too much pressure on young children, expecting them to babysit while you work, or and so just really keeping in mind your child's developmental age, what's appropriate for them, making sure they're getting enough sleep and that they're getting their schoolwork done, that you really balance your child's childhood. And so Mom was protecting her children, even in these extreme situations of being in a culture where there was no backup, there was no government help if you were struggling. And so she still yet found ways to help them get rest and make sure they got an education. And so in your own life, as you're teaching your children to work, because it is really important that you're also keeping that in balance. And then Mom Moody also emphasized the importance of her work. she was trying her best to protect them. She was trying her best to not make them work too hard, but really she needed their help in order to pay the rent. And there might be times in your family where your family is working together to make sure basic things happen, that maybe you have a family business and your kids are helping you ship some of the product, or maybe you have a season where you're sick, you're pregnant, and some kids who you think are a little young to be doing this are helping take care of younger siblings or cook the food or whatever it is. Those seasons in your life can be a really beautiful season for teaching that work ethic and also for helping your children realize how important they are. Emily, who is my daughter and a frequent co-host, has talked about this before on the show, about how working and being a part of the family culture, like we were missionaries and so she was serving with us, that helped her feel important and it helped her see how valuable her role in the family was. It wasn't a detriment to her. It helped develop confidence. And so I think Mom Moody in this book, Man of the Family, she really emphasized the importance of their work, and that helped them become who they could be. And so I think that's a really beautiful step too. And so, as you're teaching your children chores, what are some of those principles that you're going to take and put into practice? And I'm going to tell you a couple of the things that we've done when we're teaching a new chore to children, because it can be hard to figure out, like, okay, what is important? How do I teach chores to my kids? What are the, steps if I have a child who is like so obstinate and does not want to help out? And the nice thing about chores is that they are actually really important for teaching motor skills. They are really important for teaching, like when your child can sort their own laundry, that actually shows that they have the categorizing skills that it's going to take later on to maybe sort scientific ideas or sort different kinds of calculations that they're making in math. So it is a skill that's going to be helpful for them at some point. Things like sweeping a floor, if they can track the broom and the dirt on the floor, they're going to have an easier time tracking words on a page, those small words on a page. And so if your child has an option of sitting on a screen or putting away laundry, watching TV, or helping unload the dishwasher, those chores actually have some real educational benefits, as well as being a great help to the household, as well as being a great help to creating an atmosphere of learning in your home. So I'm just going to talk about a few tips for teaching chores from the Peaceful Press, and we'll link this blog post as well in the show notes. The first step is just make a master chore list. So list everything that needs to be done in a week, and then you can decide which ones would be helpful for your children to do. You might need to revisit this sometimes. I have 3 children who live at home. They're mainly adults. And so it's a lot smaller chore list. Like everybody can feed themselves. Everybody can do their own laundry. The extra chores that we need to assign are a lot fewer. And so we might revisit the chore list and reallocate what needs to be done based on the season of life. And so make a master chore list, talk about it with your husband, kind of decide what are the important chores to be teaching now. And then the second step is set up our Peaceful Press chore pack. So when you buy the Peaceful Press chore pack, it's a really inexpensive $7 digital download. You can laminate the to-do and the done charts, and then you choose a few chores and routines to start with. So you'll add a Velcro dot to the back of the tasks that you're training, and let your child move the task from the to-do chart to the done chart as they complete each task. And you might just start out with just a couple of things, like making their bed, brushing their teeth, and putting their pajamas in the laundry basket. It's better to start small and go slow. We focus in the Restoration Home community on 1% improvement. And so don't try to, set the whole family up with 10 new chores right off the bat. Set a little slower pace so that everybody can learn and develop at a good, healthy pace. And then the next step is teach with games. When you have a child who hasn't been asked to do much yet, and so you're having to push through that initial kind of like pushback that is natural, especially if you've waited too long to start this chore chart process or the chore training process, teach with games. So, I would pretend that putting away I would pretend that I was a store. So, I had 7 children. That's a lot of laundry to do. And we'd have all the laundry on the couch, and I'd fold it up and put it into piles based on who the clothes belonged to. And then I would make it into a game of store. So the kids would come to me with their pennies. They would purchase their clothes, and then they'd take them to the rooms and put them away. And so that was a great way to make it fun for my kids to put their own laundry away. I also would play something like Mother May I while tidying up. I'd say, okay, put the Legos in the bin. And they'd be like, Mother May I? I had my 3-year-old granddaughter here the other day, and she was playing with calico critters. And then she'd also been painting and cutting out feathers from a peaceful preschool activity, and also had gone outside, picked a couple of camellias, and then scattered the flower petals on the floor inside. And so there was a few little small messes, and she was like probably slightly overwhelmed by it. So when I asked her to pick up the flower petals, I made it into a race. I was like, okay, on your marks, get set, go. Who can get the flower petals picked up the fastest? So maybe that's another simple thing. I don't know why children buy that, but they do. And so try making it into a race. We would also sometimes practice our throwing skills. If the stuffies were all over the floor, we'd set up a basket where the stuffies belonged, and we'd play basketball with the stuffies to get the stuffies in their bin. So try to be a little bit playful about it. Start with a joyful, playful attitude as you're teaching chores. The worst thing is to make room care and the dishes, to make all these into these adversarial, negative activities instead of just making it a cheerful experience as a family. And then the next one is promote independence. Like, okay, so you should start with doing chores in community. I love how in Men of the Family, Ma was working with her kids. They were doing things together. There was a real sense of camaraderie in the work. But at some point, you're probably going to have to, be doing a math lesson with a first grader, while maybe an older child is reading out loud to someone, and maybe another child is mixing up a batch of banana bread. And so you're not going to be able to do everything always together. And so starting to develop daily routines that your children can manage themselves is going to help you get over that hump of having to micromanage everyone. And so you might want to make reminder lists. I'm going to link the chore and routine. We have a free chore and routine download, but also we'll link the chore and routine pack in the show notes. And so making some reminder lists for your children, put them on a clipboard, or maybe you're going to get one of those calendars. I think it's called Daylight or something. I'll link that as well, where you can just, have the chores and the kids go up to the computer and they click it off on the computer. It's like so fun and high tech. And so it might be a system like that you love, but find a system that works for you to help your children get independent about going through their own personal care, their own schoolwork even. We had our beautiful morning time where we read the books from the Peaceful Press resources, like, reading through the Narnia books as we were doing the Kind Kingdom and studying European history together. And it was this beautiful morning time. But then with, 5 or 6 students at a time, I couldn't do all the rest of the subjects one-on-one with them. As much as possible, I combined those ages. So I might have been teaching a 5th and a 3rd grader the same math program from Right Start Math, so that we were all working on the same concepts together, and I could go a little bit deeper in my teaching with them. But I also might have had on their checklist, read a chapter of this book, do one lesson in Daily Grams or Easy Grammar, and do one math lesson in this, whatever. Maybe it was a workbook. Maybe it was Explode the Code. Maybe it was reading from their history. So I had a checklist set up for some of that independent work that they could do. So I could be working with another child on something while they were working. And then the last part of this talk on teaching children to work is inspect what you expect. When your children are learning new skills, the first thing you do is you just express gratitude. You show up for them and celebrate their progress. But at some point, you're going to also have to start giving some feedback. And so finding that balance where, you ask them to mow the lawn, they go out there, they push the lawnmower back and forth a couple times and they quit. And that's their first time. Maybe you're going to say, oh my gosh, look at the progress you made. This is your first time mowing the lawn and you were able to push the lawnmower and you made this much progress. But you're going to have to say at some point, okay, this is how the lawn gets mowed. Watch how I do it. Or this is how we do the dishes. When we do the dishes, when we're done loading, we hand wash. Then we clean out the sink and wash the cupboards. Then we dry and put away. Then we sweep and vacuum the floor. Here's a list of how to do it. And then when they're done, you take a look. And so this is a more advanced skill. This is not going to be happening with your 3-year-old necessarily, but this is something that is going to, you're going to start maybe with just teaching them how to make their bed. So teach them how to make their bed, do it with them a bunch, and then start inspecting what you expect so that they're actually learning how to do it the way that your family values it being done. And all of these steps go together to help your child be the kind of person who can get a job, who can keep a job, who can excel and do better at a job. And this is why I love books for teaching these skills. You know, as I'm giving you some tips from Mom Moody, and I'm giving these tips from my own life for teaching chores and teaching children how to work, I think we also have to think about what vision we're giving them. Because if the books that you're reading in your family highlight kids who get away with being miserable, kids who complain a lot, kids who disobey their parents and don't do what they're asked, kids who always have a better idea about things, if those are the kind of books you're reading, or kids who all they have to do is paint and make messes all day and somebody comes and cleans up after them all day, if those are the examples that your kids are getting in literature, it's going to be hard to motivate them. You know, this is one of my favorite, actually, early education books was called Montessori in the Classroom by Linda, I think it's by Linda Polk or Linda Lullard. And she was describing a Montessori classroom. She was a Montessori teacher with a Montessori classroom. And in that classroom, these young children, ages like 2, 3, 4, 5, were being taught to paint on their own, but also how to properly put the paints back. They were being taught how to prepare a snack on their own, but also how to clean up after themselves. And children who are given the respect of a self-care task like that develop confidence alongside those motor skills. So this is not treating our children like adults. This is training our children to be adults. And there is a difference. You know, it's not that we're robbing childhood from our children. It's that we are equipping them to be independent people instead of being dependent well into adulthood. There's too many dependent adults in culture who don't know how to cook for themselves, and so they spend all their money on food instead of being able to save up for a house, who don't know how to take care of themselves, keep their even basic things like keeping their teeth clean. These are skills that can be taught in early childhood. They're going to give your children an edge in work, in social skills, in just so many areas of life, just having that grit of knowing how to take care of themselves and their surroundings. And so I encourage you to look at teaching your chores as a fun adventure. Look at it as something that's really going to bless your children in so many ways, give them such an advantage over peers who have not been taught any skills, and just a really fun bonding experience. If you can go after this aspect of life with some joy and some fun. And so the stories that I would recommend for that are stories like Shackleton's Endurance, where we read that in The Kind Kingdom. And it's about a boat journey, but there was a lot of work. You know, they had to be getting their own, fishing for their own food all the time, or gathering wood. And they're just the grit and the endurance that these sailors had. And one of the things that Shackleton actually talks about in the book is how when he didn't keep his sailors busy, then there were a lot more problems. And so you might be finding in your home that not giving your children enough, maybe work, maybe creativity, can lead to problems. And so I'm a big believer in giving our children some free time to be creative, to think and wonder. Most of that time should be spent outside, but also having some chores could be a good thing for your children's attitudes and their mental health. Some other books that I really loved, there was a series called Wisdom and the Millers. And some of those books, they were written by Mennonites, and so they have that perspective on theology and also on what we wear. But they were really great for teaching children some virtuous behaviors. So a lot of them involve children helping their family on the farm or things like that. And so those were really inspiring for my kids. Wisdom and the Millers, some of the Little Jewel books, also I think by Rod and Staff Publishers, similar in terms of the dress and those kind of things, but these beautiful stories about working together. Obviously, the books in the Little House and the books in the Peaceful Press curriculum, the Playful Pioneers, Kind Kingdom, the Little House on the Prairie books are so good for teaching children to help out. There's the whole scene where Ma is teaching children the daily routine, wash on Monday, baking on Tuesday. I don't remember the routine offhand, but there was a whole routine that she taught them for getting the work done. There's just so many beautiful ways that we can teach our children those beautiful skills for working. And it's, using stories to do it is such a delightful, engaging way. If you have stories that you love for teaching kids a work ethic, for inspiring children to work and make their surroundings better, we'd love to hear about them. You can email us at hello@thepeacefulpress.com. And if you want to grab any of the resources I've mentioned here, we'll link them in the show notes. The Peaceful Press Shop, you can save 10% with code restoration10 at thepeacefulpress.com.